the Omega Psi Phi situation at Southern University. So Caleb Wilson, a 20-year-old student at Southern University, collapsed after being hit with boxing gloves. This is according to a investigation as part of a pledging ritual for Omega Psi Phi at the Southern University campus. Caleb McCrae, a member of the organization at the university, has been charged with manslaughter and felony criminal hazing. Last Thursday, the organization ordered chapter activities to cease and suspended pledging for all Greek organizations for the rest of the academic year at Southern University. Now, for context, I am not Greek. My lovely two co-hosts are. Um, I have questions that I would like to ask you all, unless you all, but I'm willing to give you two the space to engage with each other as someone who is not a member. You all tell me what you want to do.
I do not condone hazing, period.
Yeah, I second that, and my fraternity would also second that.
Yeah.
Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated is a non-hazing, non-pledging organization.
Can I ask you both a question that is very
Yes,
honest
go
and real?
ahead. Ask the questions.
That was the very PC answer from both of you. As someone who is
Right?
not in an organization, like of course what organization is going to be
Right?
like, yeah, we support this, and I think
What are you talking about?
Actually, this isn't funny. Yeah, you're right.
um, that is not to say that this was your each of you's individual experience because it probably wasn't, or it could have been. But how do we get beyond to where it's just the point of like, yeah, we're against this. It's like, yeah, you should be. That's the easy part. And here's
Um,
my next question. Is there even a way of rooting this out? I think that's the key question. Is
Rooting
there
it
even
out.
like situations that happen like this? Like obviously this is being covered because the person died.
Mhm.
This happens all of the time. I have a great friend who was hazed at a HBCU. I'm not going to say where or when. He ended up with a fractured toe because of something that happened. Um, of course, it's like, how does this actually, what's from your perspective, what is the process to getting this to actually stop? Because it's easy to just say, we condone it and we shut it down. Is there anything that the organizations can actually do to stop it? That's my question. From your perspective, I don't know if that's even possible.
I would say it's tricky because each chapter is
Hmm.
different.
Yeah.
Each chapter is different, and the guy who is arrested is a he was like 23, so he's not in school anymore. He came back. And I say it's tricky because I would say it needs to be level-headed people. If your chapter is one of those chapters like in HBCU, who I feel like is very big on history, very big on lineage, like older people who have gone long past graduated are probably still somewhat involved in the chapter and like bringing like coming back to homecoming,
Hmm.
so they're around. So I would say the ways to prevent that from my experience is that you have to have level-headed and respected older people in the chapter, and I mean some old heads, because I do feel like there's a hierarchy, and there's only because of the hierarchy there has to be a certain type of person to check a person like that when it's getting out of hand. And the only people that can check them would be an older person. Like if you're in a family, like your mom, I
And
can
given the
check
natural respect of the
yeah,
organization, the person at the most
yeah,
senior technically is the person with the biggest
yeah.
voice or biggest kind of everybody listen up. That's
Hmm.
interesting. Henry, any thought?
And
Oh no,
then
go ahead, finish.
that's what I would say. Yeah, that would, yeah, go ahead, Henry. Because also I will say as a woman, I feel like my experience is totally different from a man who's going through this. So
Still happens. Still
yeah,
happens
it
though.
definitely
Yeah,
still
still
happens,
happens. Yeah.
but it's
It's
definitely a
different. Yeah.
different.
um, I mean, I agree, in the sense of everybody involved in the process needs to be respectful, level-headed, and have intention with the people they're bringing into the organization. I can't give you all this is how you stop it because like Mackenzie said, each chapter is different. Each chapter operates different in every regard. And then of course you have like headquarters like guidelines that you follow with an intake process. And I would say like following that as closely as you could also prevents some of the back end stuff. But it's no and like, way to completely stop it.
No, I
I
mean you're never gonna just close the faucet on it entirely. But I think
uh,
as you all both kind of mentioned, like national, I think one thing that I've often thought about is you're either the way we talk about it or the way I think about it, you're either incentivized to do something or you're disincentivized from not doing something. Is there any punishment that national can throw down to where it's like, look, if we even get a whiff, here is, I mean, I think that works. You're either incentivized to do
not
something
to
or
be
disincentivized to not. I mean, I'm trying to think outside the box from my perspective. If you know coming into it, whether, and I like I said, this is just my from an outsider's perspective. Let's say National Organization of Insert blank organization said, I don't care if you are a current member, former member, if we catch a whiff of this at any chapter that is involved that you're involved in, here's an X penalty that feels so harsh that it's just like we don't even want to get close to this. That is
Yes.
something that I think would work.
they do.
No, it doesn't though. That's the thing. It really doesn't. Like I know I don't even say the fraternity, but one of them, I don't know if it's all, but they'll post your picture on the website. Like you will be banned. Like you will, there are, I feel like, at least from my perspective, there are these things in place. I just feel like, and there's just these people who are just taking it too far because they'll ban you, and what's really about to happen, they better, I feel like they might expel that chapter or it's going to be
And
suspended
and to me
forever.
that's the place that I was kind of getting to was like what's the level above even that? Like if
I
you're
will
because
say at
because I think
least
it's like if you're
for,
really serious about it from my perspective, somebody just has to just get lost in this or just to be like somebody has to get made such an example out of where we're like, oh, whether that means like, hey, look, if you have one incident with this, and granted at HBCUs it's a really tricky space, but hey, insert PWI. If you have one incident with this, it's just gone. We ain't bringing it back.
I
And
mean,
granted, that's me thinking like over the
that
top with it, but
happened.
like
That's how
roll it
chat
back.
like in real time. That let's say like throughout the years at Howard, certain organizations
Yeah.
have an intake because the chapter was suspended because of X, Y, and Z allegations. Like let's just call a spade.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Happened while we were there.
it's it. I mean, nationals do their best to try to prevent this, but at the end of the day, it is an organization and it needs to intake new people to survive.
Mhm.
And
I
sustain.
didn't
Do you
think
think what
there was talk always all the time. I feel like in these situations like about just making them graduate chapters. I know that like there's like older people who've done graduate chapter like on the business side of
Mhm.
stuff have been like advocating to get rid of undergraduate chapters because of these type of situations and only have graduate chapters, but then that takes away the tradition and like the
Yeah,
beginning of where this
you
began.
can't do
So
that.
there's definitely talk and pushback, but this is like one, I will say this, and I know that this might sound like a PR response, but you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Like one thing about that, I do feel like it makes you feel like sometimes people just groupthink and just like wanting to go along with it or whatever, but you don't have to do anything. And then these other people that come back, it's also a power dynamic and they're just taking advantage of it. So it's kind of hard to like, how do you take control of somebody that is so hungry for power and they're like going psycho over it and no one's stopping them?
Well, that's where you just like how you said earlier, it has to be level-headed people involved. And I think let's say because of situations like this, because of whatever, like some people disengage, some people engage, a lot of in and out or whatever however you choose to engage with the fraternity or organization at whole, um that becomes the tricky part because like it's it's tricky, man. It's really, really tricky. And
I
you
mean,
really have people that are intentional and genuine and really have like the ideal of the betterment, excuse me, of the organization. Um,
it's
and,
funny because the interesting thing here is that I can see actually both of you, like as I'm looking at both of you, I can see both of you all like wrestling with this actually in your head from like a very well-intentioned place. And I do think that, and I can imagine I'm trying to be like actually objective. Like I do think that it's probably the difficulty even talking about this for you all because you're like, hey, that's not even like my own experience. but it's the difficulty of being like, this is not a majority. It's certainly not even like a small, like it's a small percentage of a small percentage, but it does happen. But it's also just not what I have seen or what I know to be within my own kind of house. So it is, I can imagine that is kind of a difficult thing of like, hey, this only gets talked about when it's something like so extreme to the point that it like rises like this. That doesn't mean that it's that we're trying to minimize it, but like this is one case out of like so many other things. I do see that. I do kind of see you all balancing that of like my experience is totally different, and so is like so many others. This thing does happen, not to this level, but there is kind of that. I like actually can see you all kind of like thinking through that
I was about
in
to
real
turn off
time.
my camera when you turned on this when you got on this subject. I was like, camera
But
off.
but the funny thing is that, and this is where I'll give you all flowers. I do at least appreciate you all, I think, for just being honest about it. Because I do think there's actually not real conversations about like, hey, like this conversation has been had, but because I think from my outside, like even the fixes are very much so like internal things when this does penetrate outside people like myself. And you don't actually see that person who's saying like, no, actually here's like where all of like the nuance comes into this. Like, yeah, we agree this is bad, but like here's how this needs to be changed, and here's how it's difficult to do that. I don't think actually like because usually I'll be honest, like when stuff like this happens, everybody who's Greek is kind of like, oh, like don't look at me. But I do think there is like an honesty about I think what you all are doing is that like you all are being honest. Like, and that's not to say like you all are defending it or you all are calling it out, but it's also like it's a hard conversation without an easy answer.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
I do
my
think that,
problem
yeah,
is, if I'm being honest, like God rest Caleb Wilson. I really am sorry to hear that unfortunate story. I just hate how like people are taking this opportunity to talk about things that they do not understand and like the lightest bit. Um, and it becomes disrespectful on a lot of regards, and it's unfortunate because like if people were to like take a step back and understand like the historical context of why these organizations were founded and why certain things maybe were happening during said processes, especially during a certain time period where like our ancestors were getting dogs put on them and just a lot of harnessed things. So to be a black professional in that time period had to be hard, and you had to have a thicker layer of a skin. And I think that like throughout the history some of that gets
yeah.
misraveled.
I mean, and I think that that gets to what we were talking about earlier, and that I think there is like there's naturally for you all like a protection of these organizations, even if you're not a member of that specific one, because it is a larger like obviously you all are within your own organizations, but all nine of them are within this unique thing that like you two are members of two different organizations, but you share a similar experience that is naturally protective of the other one, even if you're not a member of it. But I do think that also like gets to the point where I do think like obviously you all are doing it, but other people who do have a better experience need to talk about it and need to say like, yo, this was my experience. This is the history of these organizations. Because if you're not really aware of it, and this is the one thing that you see of this every now and again, that's definitely going to cloud your perception of
Yeah.
what you think that something like this is, which is why it is important for like just regular chapter members like yourself to just be like, that wasn't my experience. And this is why these things are actually like the bedrock of the Black community. And this is why these things are so important. And I actually don't think like that's kind of existed within this conversation, like the other side. It's just kind of like all negative. Um, so I'll give you all your flowers for that. But I can see Mackenzie's like, I'm about 2 minutes away from just walking away.
No, this was good. This was good. This was okay. We needed to talk about that because that was really sad.